We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, promote the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. James Madison at your service. In this summer of 1787, the people of America, find themselves engaged in a battle for our nation's very soul. Through such regard, 11 years ago, the people of America embarked upon a singular experiment, one that philosophy has waited for, one that humanity has sighed for from the most remote ages of our common experience. 13 separate and distinct heterogeneous assemblies, crafted systems of government derived not from the power of kings or the privilege of monarchy, but rather instead the legitimate power of the people. And through the course of this experiment, we have witnessed great victories at the Battle of Yorktown. We have witnessed systems of government reared by the philosophies of John Locke and Montesquieu, and we were fixed with the opportunity to choose for ourselves whatever system of government was most conducive to our liberty and our happiness. And we have failed. The situation in America is, at this present moment, without parallel. For 6 years, these 13 separate provinces have operated under the Articles of Confederation, a system of government which Young has proven deficient in regulating this body of government into one people. Now, having delivered this unfortunate news, I'm here with a message of hope, hoping that it will mingle into your proud hearts with whatever weight might be derived from good intentions. Through this past summer in Philadelphia City, an assembly of some 55 gentlemen from 12 separate provinces have united to do the impossible, to craft a system of government the world has never seen and an example that may yet be fortunate for our posterity. In sum, a convention which may allow this American experiment to endure beyond the scope of our generation, and in some, create something that, by this new preamble written by Governor Morris, is not perfect, but certainly is more perfect. Now, I am pleased upon this occasion to join you to speak of the various debates upon the floor in the Constitutional Convention, pleased equally to reflect upon my own history, as well as to share my own thoughts and principles of government. And now those of you who do know me will know that I am wholly deficient at public speaking. Whatever eloquence might be derived has often been fostered by pen rather than personality. I have not a great many of the virtues of my contemporaries. I have not the fortitude of a Washington, the dynamism of a Henry, the wisdom of a Franklin, nor, I think, the romantic appeal of a Jefferson. But I do have my words. And before, friends, I open this conversation to you, I wished to share several of my own thoughts regarding the spirit of government. Knowing full well a system of government ought to be derived from liberty, I think to begin this conversation, we must, of course, begin with that selfsame spirit. Now, no government is perhaps reducible to a sole principle. Where the theory approaches nearest to this character, different or heterogeneous principles mingle their influence in the administration. It is useful, nevertheless, to analyze the several kinds of government, to characterize them by the spirit which predominates them. Now, Montesquieu, the Baron de Montesquieu, has resolved the great operative principles of government into fear, honor, and virtue, applying the first to pure despotism, the same tyranny we fled from in our ancient regime. the second principle to monarchies, the third to republics. Now, by that, the principle of virtue. The portion of truth blended with the ingenuity of this system sufficiently justifies the admiration bestowed on its author. Now, Montesquieu in politics was not a Newton, not a Locke, by that same principle. But in the same respect that Francis Bacon sits the greatest of moral philosophers, Montesquieu lifted the veil upon these various political principles. Should any wish to examine the roots of government, you need look no further than him. But simultaneously, how might one describe these various republican principles and where a system of government might derive its virtue? Now, first, a government operated by a permanent military force, which at once maintains the government and is maintained by it, which at once the cause of burdens on the people and of submission in the people to their burdens. Such have been the governments under which humanity has grown through every age. Such are the governments which still oppress in almost every country of Europe, the quarter of the globe which calls itself the pattern of civilization and the pride of humanity. Can one derive virtue from this? Now, secondly, government operating by corrupt influence, substituting the motive of private interest in place of public duty, converting its pecuniary dispensations into bounties to favorites or bribes to opponents, accommodating its measures to the avidity of a part of the nation instead of the benefit of the whole. In a word, enlisting an army of partisans whose tongues, whose pens, whose intrigues, and whose active combinations, by supplying the terror of the sword, may support a real domination of the few under an apparent liberty of the many. And such a government, wherever it may be found in the New World, is an impostor. It will be both happy and honorable for the United States if they never descend to mimic the costly pageantry of its form, nor betray themselves into the venal spirit of its administration. Now, in this example, can one find virtue? Now, thirdly, a government deriving its energy from the will of society, operating by the reason of its measures on the undertaking and interest of the society. Such is the government for which philosophy has been so patiently searching, for which humanity has been so desperately sighing from the most remote ages. Such are the republican governments which we endeavor now in America to invent, and pray that it should be her unrivaled happiness to possess. Now, the great desideratum of government, ladies and gentlemen, is a modification of sovereignty, to keep the few from the insults of the many, while simultaneously ensuring that a majority of the people's voice might rule. Gone are the days where one or a privileged select few may make decisions, but instead where a people may collectively with one clarion voice move through the roads in which they follow. Now, what responsibility should then belong to a people? And from there it should be remembered, finally, that it has ever been the pride and boast of America that the rights for which she contends ought be the rights of human nature. By the blessings of the author of these rights and the means exerted for her defense, she has prevailed against all opposition, endeavors at present to form the basis of a great nation. No instance has heretofore occurred, nor can any instance perhaps be expected to occur, in which the unadulterated forms of republican government can to pretend to so fair an opportunity as justifying themselves by their own fruits. In this view, the citizens of the United States are responsible for the greatest trust ever given to a political society. If justice, good faith, honor, gratitude, and all the other qualities which enable the character of a nation, fulfill the ends of government, be the fruits of our establishment, This cause of liberty will acquire a dignity and luster which has never yet been seen. And an example will be set which can have the most favorable influence on the rights of mankind. If on the other side of our governments, the unfortunate experience be blotted with the reverse of these cardinal and essential virtues, the great cause for which we are engaged to vindicate will be dishonored and betrayed. The last and fair experiment in favor on the rights of human nature will be turned against them and their patrons and friends, exposed to be insulted and silenced by the votaries of tyranny and usurpation. We sit at this present moment in the most fascinating era man has been afforded. And we see, friends, where governments die. We see at present where these articles of confederation end. So rarely over the course of human history have we watched where a government can begin. Upon that, I think it proper that our conversation should begin. As I said, I am uncomfortable in public speaking and should wish instead to hear from you, the people of America, regarding the current oppositions, the current victories in the Constitutional Convention, or equally to speak upon whatever topic I may be at your service to render and expound upon. With that, ladies, gentlemen, I conjure your minds, I conjure your intellects, and through the proxy of my dear friend, Mr. Smith, I welcome this conversation. Good day, Mr. Smith.
Good day, Mr. Madison. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's a pleasure to have your mind here.
It should be a pleasure, sir, that after rendering my great oration, it should still be a pleasure to speak with me.
Nay, it was only 11 minutes long.
Was it 11 minutes long?
You haven't heard Mr. Henry speak lately, have you?
Well, I thank God for that.
We have a question, sir, regarding the form of this government. The question is from Miss Ann Stoltz of Chesapeake, and she, being a woman and being disallowed from the conversation that is being had behind closed doors, has some fear. And her fear is that perhaps what is being held behind closed doors is the presentation of another monarchy. Can you talk to us about what's going on in that room and what has been discussed about the form of this government?
A very good question, Miss Stoltz, and I thank you for it. And no doubt, you are not the sole citizen across this country who wonders upon such regard what this grand scheme in Philadelphia is at this present moment. Indeed, when we arrived in the spring of 1787, there was great anticipation that the body of men were solely tasked with rendering the Articles of Confederation proper, to, in a word, amend that document. When I arrived in Philadelphia, I had already decided that would not be the case. After a labor of spending the better part of a year reading systems of ancient government, it was rendered that there is far more danger in slowly granting powers in government over time than giving enough power at its genesis. Now, when I arrived in Philadelphia, there was no quorum yet, meaning, to wit, enough delegates had not yet arrived. And indeed, even when we commenced at a quorum, the delegation to Georgia had still not yet arrived. Rhode Island would inevitably, and is likely inevitably, to not send any delegates, which is fine because with 55 gentlemen in the room, we likely had the whole population of Rhode Island to begin with. That is no offense to any who may be watching in Rhode Island. But upon that, the great question is, what system of government have we been building? Now, of course, in a term, the Articles of Confederation warranted a federal system of government. Federal meaning, to wit, a collection of republics united together, formed by some legislative body restricted in its powers, but ultimately subordinate to its state legislatures. A federal system of government. I will say, to ease whatever worries might be rendered amongst the ladies of America, the system of government that is proposed is one of a national government. Now, upon that, we still operate in the modes of federalism, whereby the state legislatures are reserved of their various powers and authorities, but what we endeavor to do at present is, with a single writ document, create a supreme law of the land. A supreme law by which the states shall be subordinate to, but limited in its power. This federal system of government will be supreme in its powers, yet still derivative and limited. It will be limited because only which is expressly writ in the Constitution, the various powers of our lower houses, higher houses, executive and judiciary, in whatever forms they inevitably come into, will be simultaneously supreme and restricted in its powers, while respecting all other powers to be reserved to the states. Now there is equally a great question as to why a body of some 55 white men should make a decision for the whole of America. There is validity in this question. In many regards, it contradicts the very note of democracy, and make no mistake, Ms. Stoltz, over the course of the deliberations, there have been a great many gentlemen who do not wish to see the shores of America peppered with democracy. Now, I am not one so bold as to say this. Democracy, make no mistake, is a problematic form of government. I have often written, if every citizen of Athens were a Socrates, it still would be a mob. But regardless of the republican forms of government crafted, we must utilize democracy in all exercise to ensure that our system of government rests solely upon the foundation of the people. How that is being done is through a series of checks and balances, but I might say first and foremost, as someone wiser than I might one day render. When put forward whether we are giving a monarchy or a republic, I can say with confidence that we are giving a republic, if you can keep it. Now, we find a great diversity over the course of the American suffrage laws. We see various states put forward by which there are no provisions against property for the vote. We see in the province of New Jersey, the vote not withheld to the female. But upon that, when we put to our words in our Constitution, we the people, the question must be asked, who are the people? And so, though this government will be written by some 55 men, you may rest with a surety it will not be ratified by the same, but rather instead by a careful, deliberate people to decide if it should be their government. I thank you for the question, Ms. Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. As we are already in discussion about states' form of government and a federal form of government, Pat Brown would like to know, what are your thoughts on the Articles of Confederation as they stand perhaps opposed to or in conjunction with the Constitution?
A very good question. I should say first and foremost that no discredit is due to the authors of the Articles of Confederation. They were written in a crucible of war, written in York, Pennsylvania in 1777 by a Congress who was consistently fleeing the British. To answer in brief, the great dilemma with the Articles of Confederation is that they have no power to tax the states directly, and no power to provide for a common defense, and in short, no sanction that ensures a unity of the people, no measure by which the states can be correlated and corralled together. So upon that, some greater sanction is necessary, be it of law or of blood. Additionally, under the Articles of Confederation, there is only one branch of government, one branch conducting the work of executive, legislative, and judiciary. Now, philosophy teaches this is problematic. Wherever the power in government lies with one branch, there can be only tyranny. And so instead, an extension of the sphere is necessary. Not only a separation of powers, but equally a separation of functions. In sum, a system of checks and balances. It is my sincere hope that this new Constitution, once it is finished, it will provide those various separations of powers. I thank you for the question.
Mr. Madison, we have a question from Gary, and I know that you have had the opportunity to write on a Constitution before, to be a part of a Constitution before, speaking specifically of your home country of Virginia, and not just a Constitution, but a Bill of Rights as well. And Gary wants to know about a gentleman who was on that project with you. His name is George Mason. Gary wonders, what is your opinion of Mason, specifically his take on constitutions?
Well, I thank you for the question, Master Gary. And I should say you were equally fortunate to ask me regarding George Mason rather than George Mason. because I might give you a more candid answer to his brilliance. Colonel Mason is a notoriously modest and less social man than me. You're entirely correct. In 1776, the Virginia Declaration of Rights and Virginia Constitution were crafted in committee, crafted predominantly by men like George Mason and Thomas Ludwell Lee. Now, we are fortunate at this Constitutional Convention to have several of those same framers within the room writing our federal Constitution. Edmund Randolph, a child of the Revolution, sat there with me in Williamsburg in 1776, along with George Mason, also attending the Constitutional Convention. Now, in 1776, true history was made, because before a single power was enumerated in our new Virginian government, before a single statute was revised, a Bill of Rights was crafted for Virginia. The system of government would not begin with power in government, but rather instead with what liberties might be owed. Now, Mr. Mason is a brilliantly self-taught man, self-taught upon the principles of John Locke, Algernon Sidney, the great republic of philosophers that through this enlightened age we are able to absorb. Now, upon that, Mr. Mason is not the only one to borrow from Mr. Locke. Should any of you have picked up a newspaper in 1776, it was John Locke who spoke of those natural rights of life, liberty, and, you guessed it, property. Mr. Jefferson would, of course, improve upon that with the pursuit of happiness. But these various principles do not belong to one mind. Government is not the work of one mind, but rather many heads in many hands. So upon that, these various principles, the same principles for which I spoke of earlier with Montesquieu, all influence our mind into a system of free government. Now, I've had some disagreements with George Mason of late, particularly regarding the necessity of a Bill of Rights upon a federal level. But I think that, a question for another time.
Well, speaking of another time, Mr. Madison, and I hate to continue to hound you upon your opinions of men of your time, but this might be a bit of a forward reflection, but just bear with me here. There's a gentleman by the name of Alexander Hamilton, and Dick would like to know if you could ever foresee yourself perhaps riding alongside Mr. Hamilton.
Oh, yes, I suspect I could. I did just yesterday. Mr. Hamilton, the gentleman of New York, has, of course, an illustrious political career, but more than that, one of the most brilliant political minds, in embodying in every instance one of the greatest virtues of America, that it matters not your parentage, where you were born, the quality of your blood, but solely instead the courage of your heart and the brilliance of your mind. Mr. Hamilton received great fame, of course, at the Battle of Yorktown, the seizure of redoubts 9 and 10 with the French forces, but I first met the worthy gentleman in our mutual time at Congress. Mr. Hamilton and I striking a great alliance in the firm belief that a greater and more powerful national government was necessary. And Mr. Hamilton has found some great frustration at the Constitutional Convention because the delegation of New York, so jealous of their power, has ensured that their votes would be split. Now, at this present moment in the proceedings, much like all matters in politics are, we vote as one state. And meaning to wit, with each resolution that is put forward, the delegation, comprised of 5 or 6 individuals, should inevitably vote as one voice, una voce. Regardless of Mr. Hamilton's prowess as an orator, the brilliance of his mind, he has consistently found himself frustrated as New York ensures the votes are tied. Now, I will say Mr. Hamilton conducted one of the most brilliant political maneuvers that I have ever witnessed in my life. And though he is a New Yorker and I am a Virginian, I will hesitantly admit that. Now, earlier this summer, 2 rival plans of government were put forward. The Virginia plan, authored predominantly by me, and a New Jersey plan. And the New Jersey plan offered forward an amendment to the Articles of Confederation. Again, a single-branch government, in every regard a mirror to the previous system. We debated contentiously amidst the heat of summer, the windows nailed shut, until an afternoon in June where Mr. Hamilton set forward with the floor. He would eventually speak for 6 hours upon his ideal system of government when analyzing both of those plans. He spoke about an executive which would serve for life. He spoke of a financial system that mirrored Great Britain's exactly. He spoke in every instance of tyranny, privilege, and monarchy for 6 hours. The following day, the Virginia Plan was adopted. Now, some might wonder whether Hamilton was speaking in earnest. Others might assume in every instance it was merely a brilliant ploy of politics, a sortie by which the freer of the two plans might be put forward. In that estimation, I should ever believe the latter, and I will say with confidence, there is no way I can foresee me and Mr. Hamilton's friendship ever falling apart.
You have a beautiful, bright view of the future, sir.
I thank you, sir. I just don't see it happening.
No, how could it?
How could it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Additional questions?
Very good. Gina would like to know, since you're already speaking of collaboration with the Constitution, Gina would like to know what did that collaboration look like? What other voices were involved in the drafting of this thing?
Yeah. I thank you for the question, Miss Gina. There are some already who have referred to it as an assembly of demigods, the most prolific of political minds this age has witnessed. And make no mistake, we are men. I have often written, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And what is government if not the purest reflection of human nature? And so upon that, we find minds who wish to see a stronger national government, men like James Wilson of Pennsylvania, men like Edmund Randolph, George Mason, myself, Alexander Hamilton. We see a delegation of careful men whose experience is honored even if their suggestions are not. I speak, of course, of Benjamin Franklin, the oldest of that assembly. We see veterans of the late war, General Pinckney of South Carolina. We see conservative men who at every instance wish to see their wealth preserved and mankind disenfranchised. Now, out of honor, I'm reticent to name them, but a particular gentleman of South Carolina by the name of Rutledge has said time and time again he should not adopt any constitution that does not guarantee the institution of slavery and the disenfranchisement of blacks ad infinitum, should he see a constitution adopted. We are made, Miss Gina, of a multiplicity of factions. We are Southerners, planters, in league with farmers, merchants, bankers, soldiers. Throughout the history of the world, we see various factions move against one another. But upon that, I will say with full estimation and with full hope, there is not a group of men charged with so great a task who are more pure in their intentions. There are some already who would label me the father of this would-be document, and I find any credit to that discredits the work of committee and the very nature of democracy. Many can do much more than one, and monuments to many should ever be worth so much more than monuments to one. I thank you for the question, Ms. Gina.
Mr. Madison, we have a question because you are on the topic already, mentioning South Carolina and Mr. Rutledge and the abhorrent practice of slavery. Mandy would like to know that if the government is the work of many hands and many minds, do you believe that the opinions of all men should be included in this new Constitution?
A very good question, Miss Mandy. And I should say, once more, we are built by factions of diverse opinion. We've seen the mere distinction of color made in this most enlightened age the justification for the most oppressive dominion of man over man. Now, upon that, in suggesting and rendering the opinions of all men into one document, we must put forward first the complication that a republican system of government does not foster full notions of democracy, but rather the filtration of democracy. To put it in greater terms, each of these gentlemen were appointed by their various state legislatures, rendered with instructions. In that mechanism, there is some metric of democracy, since those various representatives were elected by the people at large, and yet still we do not find the voice of all mankind in it. We might say upon this that the Constitution will be ratified by the people, and yet still, when those people move and vote upon it, that voice will still not be all people. So how then can a system of government whereby many are disenfranchised incorporate a voice of all people? Now upon that is the very notion of representation. That is the very government in which we aim to put forward, whereby whichever voice is missing from this table, the responsibility of those whom have a voice is to put forward the voiceless. Now, should it eventually be in this conversation where all Americans can be incorporated, I will speak in candor and say not at the beginning, no. But perhaps one day, if a people advocate for those who have no voice, if in every instance a majority can be stopped from encroaching on the rights of a minority, then slowly over the scope of time, a system of government can slowly include the voices of all men. But it's not done in the work of committee chambers or great halls of government. It is done in the streets. It is done through the press. It is done through determination, and it is done through the consistent practice of liberties, not just for yourself, but for all mankind. I should say upon that, I should be a little better. My family, owning some over 100 people over the course of our life, the institution of slavery has been a practice I have sat uncomfortable with, but participated and profited from. I thank you for the question.
Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Madison. It sounds to me like what you're suggesting is that men in power should vote on behalf not just of themselves, but of people not currently in seats of power.
What a very novel concept, Mr. Smith. And yet we see over the course of human history that has not been the case. Men of government have seek to their appointments for three reasons: ambition, agenda, public good, public good being the least frequented. We might expect with this Constitution to first elect enlightened statesmen, but enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm. This in every instance shows the necessity for a people to be enlightened, awakened, and united. At every instance, to keep the men of government, their magistrates, and their trustees. I beg your pardon, that was not a question by your part, but a comment, but all the same one that I find hope in.
Mr. Madison, you need not apologize for issuing your mind upon us. We thank you for it. Speaking of politicking and men who sit in seats and halls of power, we have a few questions, one specifically about parties, factions. Do you feel that they might benefit national interests or further subjugate man?
A fascinating question. When we've looked at human history, we have seen both move forward. What was the distinction of Tory versus Patriot, if not a distinction of party? What were the ancient wars between the Hanoverians and the Jacobites, if not a distinction of a party? What were the ancient battles of politics between Whig and Tory, where the spirit of party at every instance has excelled beyond the spirit of government? Now, we might say there is no greater evil than a system of government than that of faction. The problem that exists is that there is no cure that is worse than the disease. For sure as man's mind is made free, for sure as conscience remains man's greatest property, man will find unity amongst the fellow man who shares their opinion, who shares their conscience. In every instance, philosophy has taught that man will not live happily with those who have opposite views of him. And so from that, natural factions in a system of government are an inevitability. This has led certain philosophers to say that republics should be homogeneous, that everyone should be the same, fixed by one occupation, one religion, one belief. This is a fallacy. It is this spirit which has seen in every instance the few punished by the many, and philosophers over the course of all human history endeavoring to solve. Now, David Hume said something far more fascinating. He said, rather extend the sphere, encourage diversity, a multiplicity of factions to ensure in every instance all might be protected. Now, this is natural faction. What of artificial faction, political party? Well, from that exists for one prime reason: to make one party a check to another, to ensure at every instance that opinion might be forwarded, but that those men of government do not overleap the great barrier to the rights of the people. And upon that, what does the common American have a need for artificial faction when already we find ourselves so multiplied by the common distinctions which unite and separate us? Any government that would seek to divide a people based upon an artificial notion of faction does so solely to keep a people divided, and thus easier to maintain and regulate. A people at every instance must regulate their government, not the other way around, upon the purposes of destroying liberty. I thank you for the question.
Mr. Madison, that question was from Stan. I believe I neglected his name, but we thank you, Stan, for that question. And this next question is from Tracy, and she's wondering about the recording of these sessions. She asks, are these sessions recorded? And I can only assume that Tracy is talking about the sessions at the Congress? At the convention,
I see. A very good question. Well, yes, but that's not exactly a good thing. Now, you see, when we adopted our rules of order, it was decided the deliberations of this convention would be secret. Would there be a daily record of them? And upon that, several of those notes and recordings found their way outside of Freedom Hall. You can imagine the scandal this caused when General Washington, presiding officer of that convention, the next morning placed the notes that he found upon the table, asking any gentleman to step forward and claim them. To no great surprise, no one did, and we have been much more frugal with our notes since. Now, that being said, there has been a particular curiosity that I have held over the course of these deliberations. Now, as I said at the beginning, we have seen where governments die. So rarely have we seen where they are born. In such regard, the genesis of such structures and scriptures of government. And so upon that, it has been my hope to record the various proceedings, the debates, what has been recorded, what has been said. And the gentleman happily agreed to this mechanism, provided that it not be published until all of them die. So I have to outlive all of them. Now, I have a shorthand of the 7 languages that I speak. Whichever word is the shortest in that particular language is the one that I use. I have a small and comfortable place at the front of Independence Hall, whereby I might listen with ease and access to the various debates. And then the labor of my evenings is spent transcribing those various things. Now, you might ask upon that, why? Why this curiosity and why this labor? So that should America endure, and it is my sanguine hope it will endure, at every instance the future might revisit these various debates, and from that find not only a comfort that government is never in every instance a fait accompli, always conflict, that in every instance the past will have more answers in such regard than those same problems. That has been my project as of late, but the only measurement by which these various things have been recorded. I thank you.
Sir, we only have a few minutes left.
Oh, very good.
But we have so many questions from folks. I should warn you, some of them might be quite far into the future. Would you be all right with stepping into the future along with us?
Well, I should see no opposition to it. I should welcome and moreover should likely confide to the whole of this. I'm not really James Madison. I know, take it in. My name's Brian Austin. I play James Madison here at Colonial, Williamsburg. I want to welcome you to another one of these Facebook sessions on a topic that is as important today as it was several hundred years ago, our U.S. Constitution. Now, with that said, let's go into a rapid-fire round with the time that's left. Let me have it, Mr. Smith.
Very good. Since you're already somewhat out of character, we're going to do maybe an out-of-character question. Christian wants to know, Christian says, let's assume you could travel maybe 100, 200 years into the future and could look back. What might you expect the Constitution to evolve to?
It's a very, very good question, Christian. I don't know. I really don't. Now, Madison, I think, was expecting in every instance the Constitution to be followed very, very strictly. And it's what eventually caused the party politics of the 1790s. Madison was very guarded at inferring what the Constitution could or couldn't do because he didn't want it to grow so much in power. Now, Madison, even at the Constitutional Convention, was talking about North and South dividing against one another and engaging in a bloody war. It could be argued the U.S. Constitution was the first preventative to stop a civil war. So Madison, looking back, I think, through the window of time and seeing that happening would be disheartening. But the fact that we're still operating under that same federal Constitution 27 amendments later, that it has been able to incorporate, to enfranchise, to free a people, and that despite the various tensions we face every day, it still operates under the frame of we the people, sparking a national debate, I think is something that would astound any of the founding generation. That's a great question.
Anita, thank you. This may be a question for James Madison.
Oh, very good.
Anita would like to know, Mr. Madison, I understand that you and Dolly are frequent visitors to Monticello. Where did you first meet Mr. Jefferson, and what was your impression of your now dear friend?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. So Madison and Jefferson meet here in Williamsburg. They meet in 1776, but their friendship is completely solidified here in 1779. Jefferson is, of course, the second governor of Virginia. Madison is one of his 8 counselors. He becomes his advisor, then he becomes his friend, then he becomes his collaborator, and their relationship carries on for the rest of really both of their lives. It's said by Paul Jennings, who was Madison's enslaved manservant, that no two brothers were as close as James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. It's a great question.
America's first bromance?
You could call it that, I think.
Thank you, Brian. Mandy would like to know, can you tell us about Madison's time at the College of New Jersey and why he chose to study there as opposed to Williamsburg?
I would love to. This is great because there's a lot of primary material on this. So Madison was a very sickly young boy, and equally he was a very severe and serious student. Now, the College of William and Mary in Jefferson's time had the brilliant William Short or Small, Kurt?
What's that?
Was it William Small or William Short?
Well, they both existed, but are you talking about Dr. Small, William and Mary?
William and Mary.
Yeah, Dr. Small.
Yeah, Kurt's, no, not Jefferson's teacher, not Kurt's teacher. Sorry, didn't mean to break that illusion. But from that, he had left William and Mary at that point, and William and Mary had developed somewhat of a reputation of being a bit of a party school. And so Madison's father wasn't terribly happy to hear that. Also, this area, Williamsburg, for any of you who are local and have stepped outside today, it is hot. It's in the 18th century was notoriously really bad for your health, and Madison, being hypochondriacal, avoided that. And so instead, his tutor advised he go to the College of New Jersey, specifically because of one man, John Witherspoon. John Witherspoon was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a prolific political mind, and it's no wonder then that the majority of the signers, or the College of New Jersey had the most signers of the Declaration of Independence than any other American college, and it's because of the teachings of John Witherspoon. And Madison was, in every instance, soaked up in that idea and spirit of liberty. He spent what would have been 5 years of study and completed it in 3 years, spending his 3rd year studying politics and theology directly under John Witherspoon. That's a great question.
Thank you. Before we get to our final question, we have one more, and it must go to a 7-year-old named Harper. And Harper wants to know, were you really the smallest president to date?
Harper, that's a great question. So Madison was around between 5'4" and 5'6". It's not something they can agree on because, unfortunately, he never got measured in his time. What was known was that he was about 120 pounds. So his wife, Dolly, famously called him the Great Little Madison. He was a very, very small man, a very, very frail man. And I think when chalked up to a lot of the other American presidents who are over 6 feet tall, I think Madison still ranks as the smallest. So I have to spend a lot of my time slouching.
That got me.
Yeah.
So our last question is an amalgamation from several folks who essentially have asked the same question. And I'll give them credit where credit is due. Ken would like to know, would you be amazed that the Constitution could have survived for more than 2 centuries? Would you equally be amazed at how many amendments there are? Coral and Christian also would like to ask to what extent should men interpret such a document for modern problems? So I think all of those may be wrapped up into one, is what advice might you have for a people, any people, who are pursuing a system of self-government for all?
That's a great question. We could engage in a debate all day about what works and what doesn't work about the Constitution. What's really incredible about it is that it works so long as you work at it. Not just those in government, but the citizenry of the United States. When Madison died, he was the last founder of his generation to pass away. And he wrote something down that he put in an envelope and wished to be opened after he passed away. It was a small, brief sentiment of hope for a country that he'd spent his entire life trying to build. And it's the easiest thing that I can leave you with, which is the advice nearest to my heart and deepest in my convictions is that the union of the states be cherished and perpetuated, that the open enemy be regarded as the Pandora with its box opened, and the secret one, the serpent, creeping with its deadly wills into paradise. At every instance, the United States has seen a great deal of strife, of turmoil, over the course of its relatively short history as a nation. But at every instance, the thing that binds us together, the thing that might persevere beyond party, faction, or whatever division we can find, is division's opposite, which is union, unity. Thankfully, we're able to practice that here at Colonial Williamsburg and continue to tell all of America's stories, the good ones and the bad. So stay tuned for future live feeds that are coming your way. Come visit us in the historic area and never stop learning from both myself and myself. Enjoy the rest of your day. These live feeds are thanks in part to the many wonderful and generous Colonial Williamsburg donors.